Well, with more on the questions being asked by delegates at the AFN and the MOU itself, we're now joined by our political strategist. Susan Smith is a Liberal strategist, principal and co-founder of Blue Sky Strategy Group. Cole Hogan is a Conservative strategist, and George Soule is a former NDP Director of Communications, now principal and founder of On Step Strategies. Hello to the three of you.
Hello.
Hello. So listen, let's begin here with what we heard today, these ongoing questions about the government and ultimately its commitment to getting consultation with First Nations. How big of a misstep was it to move forward with this MOU without getting buy-in from Indigenous leadership in the first place, in particular from the BC Coastal Chiefs? So George, I'll get you to start us out.
Well, I think it's a big mistake, and I think that we saw that with Minister Miller admitting that immediately after joining cabinet and saying that they should have been negotiating all along. I think if you were actually serious about this project, that's the only way it's ever going to get built. In the absence of the support from the Coastal First Nations, that project's not going to happen. I think the Prime Minister knows that, and I think that's the kind of language he uses when he's here in Ottawa. Don't worry, there's no project, it's going to be fine. But we saw him in Alberta getting two standing ovations from the Chamber of Commerce of Alberta, which you only get, or in Calgary, which you only get if you are going to deliver a pipeline. So it's this double messaging that's been really, I think, it worked in the very short term for the Prime Minister and for the government, but in the long term, they're going to get caught up in the two different messages they're sending.
Yeah, Susan, a misstep here?
I think they probably should have done some reach out beforehand. It's hard to explain a process for people. There's no short way to do it, and especially if it's not an answer that people want. The pro-pipeline proponents want this is the fastest way to yes. The anti-pipeline proponents want this is the fastest way to no. There's legislation, there's a process, there's stakeholders that have to be consulted. It includes First Nations. I was at the AFN Special Chiefs Assembly this week. I heard the Prime Minister answering questions. He's definitely committed to First Nations consultation. I think they could have started off on a better foot there, but he was committed to the discussions. I think they'll be ongoing. And that's what this whole major projects process is about. It's not a guaranteed yes, it's not a guaranteed no. It's a can we build things faster and better, but not without talking to the people we need to talk to.
Mm-hmm. Cole?
Sure. So I think that there is a few things of note here. Like, I think obviously things could have been done a little bit differently. From the federal side, I've seen the government of Alberta and their Indigenous Affairs Minister already engaging on a lot of these issues. But I think it's important to note too, like, Indigenous thought is not a monolith. All Indigenous people don't think the same. And we've seen, a majority of support in multiple provinces across the country for pipeline projects, given the dire economic straits that we're in. Yesterday, we saw Métis Settlements of Alberta say that they would like to purchase a stake in this pipeline project. We saw Danielle Smith say that up to 50% of this pipeline project could be Indigenous owned. So I think while things might have started off on the wrong foot, I think the provincial government and the federal government are engaging in good faith.
Okay, well, let's pick up on that point, though, because I do wonder, how do you then try to right this ship? If people feel like this was off course to begin with, how do you actually right the ship strategically? Susan?
I think conversation and dialogue, not on Zoom, is the way to do it. I'm not sure the Alberta government has started out exactly the greatest way. They've got sort of their Alberta people, they're dropping into BC communities. I think it's important for people to understand who they are speaking with, though, too, and who speaks on behalf of whom. Are you speaking to an elected chief, or is the person who's purporting to represent many voices, do they have an elected mandate in that particular case? Individual communities will have an opportunity. I've talked to coastal First Nations leaders, small coastal capital First Nations leaders, who are open to the conversation about innovation and talking about difference in technology for tankers and GPS, but the pressure, the social and public pressure around even putting your hand up to say, could we at least think about this kind of conversation in a public way, is really holding them back. So I think the governments plural, that's Alberta, BC, and the feds, working with nation governments, having those conversations face-to-face is really important. Well, BC will have to be part of the conversation. I mean, for them not to be part, they have to be at the table going forward. They have a say from a stakeholder consultation perspective under the legislation. So they have to find something that works, or they have to figure out that it's not going to work. I don't think anybody's going to throw in the towel at this stage of the game. And as everybody's pointed out, right now the proponent for this is Danielle Smith and the government of Alberta for the first $14 million part of things. It costs a lot more than $14 million to buy a pipeline or build a pipeline. And it's unlikely, you need a private sector proponent to be able to do that.
Yeah. George, how do you right the ship?
Well, I think it's hard now the path they've gone down, to be honest. Like, I think they wanted the announcement, right? So you had Mark Carney standing next to Danielle Smith with a big smile on their face in Calgary, getting the standing ovations and having all those accolades. But again, hadn't done the difficult work to move forward. I mean, Stephen Harper taught us the lesson of trying to jam these things through means you get nothing built. And that, I think, is the lesson that the Liberals should have learned already and now have to relearn. They also need to figure out what they want to do. Like, they're trying to play both sides of this, and it's too complicated and too difficult an issue to dance on both sides of the issue, I think. And I think they need to figure that out. They can't keep celebrating the fact they're announcing big projects and try to defend them by saying, don't worry, they're not going to get built in the first place.
Cole?
Yeah, the conversation is shifting too, because we've seen some bits and pieces here. Christy Clark recently said that there are tankers carrying oil from Alaska all down the west coast on a regular basis. So that's a part of the conversation. David Eby seems to even have shifted his language on this project. And Alberta, obviously, in its relationship with the federal government, is looking to see some quicker movement on this stuff. But what I'm looking at as well is, Stephen Guilbeault criticized the project and said he doesn't think it's going to happen. We've seen some BC Liberal MPs in Carney's caucus say that they don't think this project's ever going to happen. There's a lot of, disparate, different voices speaking at the same time. So who are we to believe here? The BC Liberal MPs who say it'll never happen, or the Prime Minister and his cabinet who appear to want it to happen? And at the end of all of this, the pipeline, it's an interprovincial pipeline project. It's federal jurisdiction. So the federal government has the last call on this. So will they honor that responsibility, or will they run away from him?
Yeah, well, you sound like you don't want it to happen, actually, which is kind of how the Conservatives have been talking, right? They've been screaming and yelling and hollering and stamping their feet for another pipeline, yet they can't get on board behind the process, and they're criticizing the process. To make change in the country, you have to be able to have conversations with people. You have to do things better, which is what this C5 legislation is. If you can have one environmental assessment that looks at, rather than duplicative, I think everybody knows it makes sense. You go to the doctor once or twice. You go once, you get your report, and it, you move forward from that if it's just your regular checkup. So I think it's important to allow the process to take place. The government is trying to do something new, trying to do something different. There will be yeses and there will be no's at the end, but you can't write it off right from the get-go. Of course there are two voices.
There are two voices within the Liberal caucus.
Right.
Okay, but there's
two voices within Mark Carney's head. That's the biggest problem. Mark Carney himself is making two different announcements. It's the epitome, I said this the other day, he's the epitome of him, of saying two things in two different places. And the problem is there are video cameras in both places. If you watch what he said in Calgary, it's this thing's getting built. We're building this pipeline. Here we go. High five, Danielle Smith.
Here's the process.
Who, by the way, it's also a premier who is destroying public health care in this country, using notwithstanding clause to attack trans kids, using notwithstanding clause to attack workers and teachers, and the Prime Minister shaking her hand over an imaginary project. And that's another problem we have to deal with separately, I think. But then meanwhile, he comes back to Ottawa, and when attacked by environmentalists, or when rightfully pushed back by the First Nations who control the land on the coast, he says, no, we're nowhere near making the pipeline. We're just open to the idea now. And so those two positions held by one person who is the Prime Minister is what's causing this conflict. It's why there's so much confusion within the cabinet, because the person at the top isn't clear, and I think it's intentional.
I don't think there's confusion in cabinet. I don't think there's confusion at the top. There's a process in place to be able to get major projects done in this country on the East Coast and the West Coast and in between, whether it's rail, whether it's ports, whether it's critical minerals, whether it's a pipeline. There is no project that has been green lit yet, but there's a process to try and do things differently in this country, and that's what Canadians wanted. They said, quit doing it the same old way and don't always be about no. Let's be about how we can get to a green light if we have enough people who can agree to it. And I think we have to let the process get going.
Well, except when people are being asked the question, they're not being asked, do you support the process? They're asking, do you support pipelines being built? So it's actually more clear for Canadians about a pipeline than just a process.
Yeah, and there are many different opinions on should there be a pipeline built. It depends on where you are in the country. And so to expect 100% acquiescence or 100% support for anything in Canada is impossible. You can't get it on what should we have for dinner tonight at your own family dinner table. You're not going to get it when it comes to regional disparities. But you have to find a way to make the path, to create a path to make the best decision for the country. And the way we were doing it before only got one pipeline built and didn't get any mines going fast enough. So is there a way to get to it in a better, safer, environmentally friendly way where Indigenous people have an equity opportunity in a project? I think that's what this government is trying to do. And I think it's important that the opposition see the nation building opportunities that are presented rather than complaining about it.
Quickly running time, some last closing thoughts to either of you?
Quickly on that last point, there is actually a path, and there is one, the one pipeline that was built is not a capacity. So even if we were talking about trying to get more resources to our customers, which you can have two debates on that one as well, but a pipeline exists that's got capacity in it that we should be first filling up before we're talking about trying to blast another pipeline through land that people don't want it to go through.
That's why the NDP, like that's not, sometimes you have to do two things at once and you have to contemplate
Let's start
going
with
forward.
the easy one and then move to the harder one.
Okay, Cole, last word to you.
This is what happens when the Liberal Party tries to do two things at once. Like, they're going to try to say that they are pro-energy, and look, Danielle Smith and the Alberta government got a lot of concessions out of the federal government here, but it remains to be seen, especially with internal caucus debates. Like, there's a lot of people in the Liberal caucus who don't like the direction that Mark Carney's taking the Liberal Party in, the amorphous, ephemeral, ideological cluster that it is. So we'll see if these people having elected Mark Carney, do they actually like the policies that he puts in place?
Okay. I remind you there's a green room if you want to continue the conversation.
You can't talk about the floor crossing from the Conservatives underbelly. Oh, come on!
Susan, Cole, George, thank you very much.
Thank you.